following announcement has been paid for by the new Howl Order.
Whether the team is giving us the highest of highs or the bluest of blues, we'll cover it all here on Commanders Nightly News. I, of course, am your host, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Let's get to tonight's lead story. So all this talk about the offseason and, this being a preferred destination potentially, and all of the resources that we'll have at our disposal, and why this could potentially be a quick turnaround. I know a lot of us view this roster and look at the situation that has been created here of late with some of the moves that have been made and some of the players that just haven't panned out. And we see a bunch of holes and we see a roster that needs extensive work. But again, one big offseason, you push all the right buttons, and this league every year we see it. Last year, the Giants were supposed to be a mess. First year head coach, new GM, they were supposed to be desolate. They won, 9 games, made it to the playoffs, won a playoff game. This year, the Texans were supposed to be one of the worst teams in the league. They had the number 2 overall pick. They get the right coach. They get a quarterback. They press all the right buttons, draft a bunch of good players, bring in a couple of good free agents. Voila. They're right now in the midst of a playoff chase. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen here, but this league is set up for a worst to first or a worst to in the mix setup every year. And we see this every year. 3 or 4 teams that didn't make the playoffs the year prior make it the next year. So I'm not here to preach to you about what Washington will or won't be next year. But, all of this thinking has also got me to thinking about, I'm an optimist, so I'm always thinking about positivity and all of the best things that can happen. And sometimes it gets me into trouble. You guys know this. I had Washington going 12-5 last year and 11-6 this year. So that's the positivity in me. It gets me in trouble sometimes, and I'm not ashamed of that. And I don't walk that back, and I'm not going to apologize for being positive. That said, there is a negative side to a lot of things, and I started thinking about all the positives, and then I also thought about, well, what if? So I wanted to ask you guys, and I'm going to give you my response to this hypothetical, essentially. So the question is simple. What is the worst case scenario for Washington this offseason? What's one of the worst things that could happen? One of the worst decisions that could be made this offseason for this organization in terms of forward progress and moving the needle in the right direction? For you, okay? This is a personal preference question. I'm looking forward to reading your responses. I'll give you my answer now. So, we've all assumed that once this season's over, Week 18 hits, changes will be made, sweeping changes will be made. Martin Mayhew probably fired, Ronald Rivera fired, his staff gone, and now we go on this vigorous hunt and search for the next general manager of this organization, who will then select the next head coach of this organization, who will then fill out his staff, right? That's what we assume is going to take place. That's what we envision taking place if this is done correctly. But what if this team, and I'll say this, Rivera making these changes at this point, this is a last-ditch effort to save his job. And while most of us already believe it's far too late for any of that to take place, I think most of us would agree. His grave was dug as a head coach after they lost to the Bears, but he wasn't in it yet, right? The casket wasn't in there. He wasn't in there, none of that, but the grave was dug. The first loss to the Giants felt like him being tossed into that casket that was already in the grave, and it felt like the last loss to the Eagles, that second loss to the Eagles, was them slamming the casket shut, and it felt like the loss to the Seahawks was them starting to shovel dirt onto that casket, and the Giants game, the second Giants game, was them finishing, putting all the dirt and putting the tombstone, the headstone in there. Here lies Ronald Rivera's head coaching career, right? That's what it felt like. It was a process, but it really started with that Bears game. We've all assumed that this thing is over for him. But what if these changes that he makes at the end of this season, this is what Ronald is hoping, right? That he can prove that, hey, I am a really good coach, and Jack Del Rio was the problem. This is why the defense stunk. I took over, and let's say the defense plays better down the stretch, and this team somehow manages to win 4 out of the final 5 games of the season. The defense plays exponentially better. EB in the offense continues to trend in the right direction. And, they finished this season at 8-9, and he's able to say, hey, look, we made the necessary changes to get this thing on track, right? You give me the final year of you got to pay me anyway. Give me the final year of my contract to prove to you that I belong. Look, you can go get a new general manager. You can get rid of Martin Mayhew. Don't make me the final say, right? Just let me be the coach. That's fine. Find somebody to be the guy that picks the players and makes those decisions. I answer to that guy. I'm no longer in charge. It's not coach-centric anymore. I'm fine with that, which he doesn't have any say-so over that anyway, right? He's got to be fine with whatever they decide. But this is his pitch to save his job. Hey, we won 4 out of our final 5 games. The defense came to life under my tutelage. I can call the defense next year. EB in this offense is hitting their stride. You give them another year with a young quarterback. We've got all these resources. You go get your general manager. You got all these draft picks. You got all this cap space. Let that GM do what he needs to do. He gives me the pieces, and I'll go out and I'll coach this thing, and I'll turn it around. What if Rivera isn't fired? EB's back as OC. Ronald is calling plays next year defensively, and all they do is remove Martin Mayhew and insert said GM. What if that took place? How upset would you be? I think I would lose it if that happened. I asked myself this question: which would I be more upset by? That scenario that I just posed, where Ronald is back next year for his 5th and final year of his contract. EB is back next year in his 2nd season as offensive coordinator. And they get a new GM, but pretty much the entire staff is back, which is a nightmare because this is the staff that has us starting slow every single. And look, I know a lot of times I blame the staff, and these players are culpable as well. And I always make sure that I add that in there, that the players are culpable as well. This is not just a staff issue. And especially when you go back and you watch the film and you see opportunities and you see some of the things that could have been done, but the players just didn't execute. It's not always just the coaching staff, but there's a fine line that you have to make sure that you straddle when you talk about players versus coaches and who's responsible for what. To me, the best coaches in this league have their teams prepared, and usually the best foot is put forward and the best product is on the field when you have a really good coaching staff. Whether it's good enough to win is a different story, but rarely do you see good coach teams come out and trail 24-0, 27-3 at half to a winless team at your place. It just doesn't happen in the NFL if you're well coached and prepared. This is the narrative with Washington every week. And if you keep Rivera, you keep EB, and you keep this staff, you're just going to run into the same issues, the same problems. This team not being prepared. That doesn't have anything to do with the GM, or that's a Ronald Rivera issue. This team is never prepared. Never. It's rare that we come out guns a-blazing and keep our foot on the gas pedal. Rarely does that happen. And again, some of that is on the players. But that 4th and 1 call against the Eagles in the second game, that's on Eric Bieniemy. That was a terrible play call on 4th and 1. That 4th and 1 play call against Dallas on Thanksgiving, that's on Eric Bieniemy. That's a terrible play call. How they started against the Giants and the game plan and them being prepared to stop a terrible Giants offense and being ready to go out and take advantage of a blitz happy coordinator in Wink Martindale that first Giants game. That's on the coaching staff. We were ill prepared. We were ill prepared against the Giants the second time, right? Even though we knew what the Giants were going to do, though we knew they couldn't score, we still let them score. That, again, it's on the players when you're up 10-0 and you got a chance to stick it to the Patriots and Brian Robinson Jr. fumbles. That's on the players. That's on the players. Sam throwing a bad pick before halftime, that's on the players. So it's not just the coaching staff, but, man, I tell you what, being unprepared week after week, year after year, is something that I just can't stomach another year, right? What if they've decided to do that? And I said, what would be worse? Them doing that, Rivera back, EB back, staff back, new GM, or bringing in Bill Belichick? Which one would piss me off more? And I honestly don't know which one would upset me more. I mean, both of those scenarios seem like a dead end to me. But again, I don't think there's any way in hell Ronald's back. And we're not winning 4 out of our final 5 games. This was a hypothetical, right? So I'm asking you, what's the worst case scenario for you this offseason? For me, I think it would be the combination of Ronald Rivera and EB being back would be the worst case scenario. They're definitely making a change at GM. That goes without saying. They're definitely doing that whether Ronald is back or not. It's not going to happen. He's fired too. This thing is going to be blown up and start over. But again, part of the reason why my brain was allowed to wander was I've been going back and I've been trying to gather as much information because I really don't know Josh Harris as an owner, right? And the last thing I want to do is listen to 76ers fans who are bitter, who are trying to tell us that this guy. Now, I don't want to completely ignore them because that's what I did to Panthers fans when they tried to warn me about Ronald Rivera, and I wasn't trying to hear it, and then I ended up saying, damn, those Panthers fans were right. I don't want to ignore those Eagles fans or those 76ers fans. Most of them are probably both, right? But I know what I've seen. It was different in Carolina. We watched the 7-8-1 Panthers beat the Arizona Cardinals in the playoffs. We knew that Ronald's track record wasn't the greatest, but we also knew about 2015 and the 15-1 season and et cetera, et cetera. But we knew his tenure there. They weren't great in Carolina, right? It's different with the 76ers because they're one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference every year. I still don't think they have enough talent, and some of their better players don't step up in some of the big-time moments. They got good players, but I don't know if they have enough. Their bench is never good enough. I could go on and on about the 76ers. That's nor here nor there. He's given them an opportunity to win a championship every year in Philadelphia, or at least get to the Eastern Conference Finals every year. And that's all we're asking for in Washington. But when he first took over, and this is the kind of stuff that I've been looking at, with Josh Harris, when he first took over, right? Trying to kind of figure out what's going to be the template when he comes here, right? And when he starts to wield his power here, I'm trying to figure out what he's going to do. And one of the things he did in Philadelphia when he first took over, and I remember going and looking and the first time seeing it, and it felt like, that's interesting, is he didn't fire Doug Collins, who was the coach when he took over the 76ers organization. He didn't fire him immediately. I think he gave him another year or two after he took over. So he could very well come in here, assess the situation, say, hey, you know what? Ron's got another year on his contract. It's not going to do anything rash right now. What I am going to do is take that title of, full autonomy from him and not have it be coach-centric, and he won't have the final say in personnel and overall decision-making power. I will take that from him and just let him focus on being the head coach. But I'm going to allow him to continue to be the head coach here. See how this thing turns out. See if he can get this group to win. I like what they're doing with the young quarterback. I think it would be remiss on my end to break him and this offensive coordinator up only after a year. Let's see what they can do with a second year and a little bit of continuity that they've built. And I'll let those guys handle that. And I'll go out here. I've already brought in Eugene Shin. I'll bring in a new general manager. Those two will work together to figure out what's the best path for this team from a directional standpoint with the roster and the draft picks and how we're going to move accordingly. And I could see that. He did that with the 76ers. That makes me a bit nervous. I'm not going to lie to you, but I think this is different. He's had a chance to sit back, assess everything. He's seen this team struggle, and they're going to struggle to finish, and that's the key. If there was a turnaround here at the end of the season that Ronald could point to and say, hey, look, Jack and our secondary coach, Brett Wieselmeyer, weren't doing a good enough job. And it took me a while to get to that conclusion, but I got there. I made the necessary changes. And you see how we finished the season. We won 4 out of our final 5 games. We played some damn good teams, including the Dolphins, the 49ers, the Cowboys, and these are all playoff teams. And we beat 2 out of 3 of them, right? We took care of the teams that we were supposed to in the Rams and the Jets. And I say that loosely. We're not supposed to take care of anybody, okay? But that's his pitch to Josh Harris at the end of the season. Hey, we righted the ship. It took me a while to get to where we needed to get to, but we righted the ship. And I think if we have an offseason, we add some more talent, we shuffle some of the things around, I think we got a chance to really make a power move next year. And what if Josh Harris says, okay, I'll grant you that. I'll go get us a real GM. You focus on coaching the team. EB focuses on the offense. You can find yourself a defensive coordinator if you like. But I'm telling you right now, if that guy doesn't get it done, there are no more chances. I'd be pissed, to say the least. And I think that's the worst thing that they could do this offseason is keep this thing as is. Because we've seen 4 years of this now. We know there's a large enough sample size here of what Ronald Rivera is as a head coach. You can even go back to his days in Carolina, but I erase that. Forget about Carolina. I'm talking about here, in his track record here, of the slow starts to not only games, but seasons. We didn't even get the Rivera streak this year. I mean, there's still time, right? Which could actually save his job if he got hot now, but that's no here nor there. We're not going to get hot. We've watched this team. They're going in the wrong direction. There is no saving his job. It's over. But that would be the worst thing that could happen. Right? What says you? Leave it in the comment section. Worst case scenario that this team could have happen this offseason. Leave it down in the comment section. I can't wait to read. I'm almost like, do I want to read it? Because that will allow my brain to wander. And it's some scary hours around here. We still all have PTSD, right? Yeah, every time we think it's safe to come out, week 4 Eagles game, right? I'm screaming after that game. I'm pissed off. I can't believe we lost in overtime. That game was there for the taking. And I'm screaming. I'm outside and we're going to see these bastards in 4 weeks, and we're going to win these next 3 games against the Bears and the Falcons and the Giants, and then we're going to see these bastards again, and we're going to be 5-2, and it's going to be for first place again in the division, and we're going to beat them the next time. And then we lost to the Chicago Bears by 20 at home, the winless Chicago Bears by 20. Every time we think it's safe to come out, something bad happens. It's different now. I'm not allowing myself to think in that manner. And I'm a positive guy. That's just not how I operate. I'm going to assume, and generally I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume that Josh Harris is going to do the right thing. Like Spike Lee, he's going to do the right thing. So we'll see what happens. Leave it down in the comment section. I'm actually a little nervous to read some of your diabolical thoughts here because some of y'all You guys are twisted, man. Anyway, let's move on to the next segment in other news. And I want to say this quickly because I'll forget. I did yesterday. I meant to mention this yesterday, but this is how you know we're down bad, right? Normally, this would have been a lead story. Washington fires Jack Del Rio. They fired defensive backs coach Brent Wieselmeyer. And yesterday, Adam Schefter reported that Washington's bringing in former Bills defensive backs coach, secondaries coach, Jim Salgado, right? And he's going to come in and more likely than not fill the same position here in Washington as the secondaries coach, coaching those defensive backs, because the assistant defensive backs coach was a young kid that wasn't ready to take over an entire room. So hence you bring in a veteran that's done it for a number of years in this league, and Ron's comfortable with this guy. And so he's going to come in to help. Still, like JoJo, too little, too late, right? But that would have been a big story if we were any good, but we're not. So that's back page stuff now. Bringing in a guy to come in and help this struggling secondary, too little, too late. It is what it is. This secondary is what it is, and there's really no helping it at this point. They are who they are, and we'll see what happens these final 5 games of the season, but can't really see much changing at this point as we go into week number 13. So, we heard from Eric Bieniemy. Normally it would be coordinator Thursday. One of the coordinators is no longer here, so we just heard from Eric Bieniemy today. We'll talk about what he had to say, but before we do that, we'll take a look at the injury report for both teams as we head into week 13. And so we start with the good guys. Like I said, relatively sparse injury report for the Commanders. I got confidence that both Alex Arma and Tyler Larsen are going to play. Larsen scared me a bit. I'm not going to lie. I got shook a little bit when I saw DNP for him. And I should have just said, all right, veteran. He's dealt with some issues with the knee and the ankle the last 2 years. Maybe he hasn't had a break really this season. He's getting up there in age. And we haven't had our bye week yet. So he hasn't had that time to just kind of recover and get away. The Thanksgiving break provided him with a pseudo bye, but maybe he just needed a vet rest day. Whatever the case may be, he was back at practice on Thursday. That allows me to exhale a bit. I'll be even more fine and okay if I see that he practices tomorrow and is going to play. Alex Arma, would love to see him get back out there because I want to see more under center work from this offense. You know that. But it's not that big of a deal, honestly. I want him out there, but if he's not, it is what it is. James Smith-Williams, we already, discussed this. He's not going to be back prior to the bye. And so none of this is a surprise. But Forbes being out, we were told earlier this week that his injury is more significant than they had hoped. Thus, we already know he's not playing either, which sucks because your first round pick and your third round pick aren't healthy enough to contribute, and you really don't even know what either one of them can do at this point, which it sucks. They need reps. That's the only way they're going to get better. That's the only way they're going to take steps to being the best versions of themselves at this level is by playing, and neither one of them are healthy enough to do that. So, yeah, that sucks. So, that's where we are. Again, very sparse injury report. You love to see it, right? Now you go to the Dolphins, and they've got a laundry list. But as I told you, the good teams do this. The Eagles do it to us every single time. 27 guys on the injury report, and 26 of them play on Sunday, right? This thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 players long. I don't know if I've ever seen a list this long before. The Eagles have been there, though. I think they've had like 15, 16 guys on the list before, but this is overkill. And now you're just making sure I'm not going to get in trouble with the league because I didn't report an injury. Like, a lot of these dudes are fine, right? Out of the 17 guys on this list, 2 of them didn't practice. Okay. Javon Holland and Kendall Lamb. So everybody else is playing, and one of those two might play. I think Javon Holland has a legitimate shot to not play. But everybody on this list pretty much is going to play. So there will be no breaks for Washington. Not that we are able to take advantage of them anyway, but there will be no guys that are key contributors out of this game that will, potentially allow Washington to somehow sneak the Miami Dolphins. That said, Eric Bieniemy, offensive coordinator today, and he briefly talked about Jack Del Rio being fired, and pretty much said, look, it's the NFL, shit happens. I hate it for Jack, but life goes on. That's it's such a results-based business, and it's such a cutthroat league. The NFL is. There's no other sport quite like it. No other sport is quite like the NFL. Is the only sport that you get hurt and you cannot get paid because you got hurt. You might reach an injury settlement or something. It's a fraction of your salary, and they're cutting you loose, right? Again, every other sport, once you sign your name on the dotted line, you're getting all of your money. Again, the NFL is different because there's 53 guys on a roster at any given time, and then you've got another, 10 to 15 or however many people are on the practice squad. It's a lot of money you're dishing out. So it's not like the NBA where there's only 12 to 15 guys on an NBA roster. Major League Baseball, there's 25 guys on a roster. You're not paying as many players, so you can afford to pay these guys the amount of money that you're paying them. In the NFL, it's a lot of guys, right? Still, there's no business quite like the NFL business, and so it's like guys are immune to players getting cut, establishing relationships with, and then coaches getting fired. It's just a part of the business. It's the nature of the beast. So, Eric was like, life goes on, beat goes on. We getting ready for the Dolphins. Ain't nothing we can do about Jack. But, he talked about, and I told you yesterday, and I reiterated this because we've talked about this before, but I reiterated it yesterday. When it's convenient, EB is quick to let you know, hey, this is not my first year as a coordinator. I've been doing this for 6 years. I had 5 years of experience in Kansas City, and now this is my 6th year. And he pulled that card today. When it's convenient and he feels disrespected, that's when he pulls that card. Like, hey, let me just remind you, this ain't my first year. When it's convenient and we're talking about the growth of this team and him as a coordinator, that's when he doesn't check anybody when they say it's something like that. But when they start with that and they're not talking about growth or this or that, if they're talking about a call that maybe didn't go the right way or, this, that, or the third, that's when he's like, hey, hold on a second. Let me just make sure I make sure the record reflects. I've done this before, right? So he pulled that card today, and then Ben Standig followed that up with a question where he said, hey, look, okay, so you want to play that game? Fine. Everybody pretty much would look at Andy Reid as a buffer of sorts when you were the play caller. This is your first year without that buffer. How does it feel? And so then he finally answered the question, essentially, which, he said, it's been a challenge. It's been fun. We continue to grow. And then he went into this spiel about all the growth he's seen from individual players. And he's naming random guys. I'm like, he named Charles Leno Jr. And I'm like, Charles Leno is 30 years old. And I'm not saying you can't grow as a player at 30, 31 years old. But I'm like, of all the guys, you could have named Sam Cosmi, right? He's a young guy, still on his rookie deal, guy that we feel like is a part of the future here. We don't even know if he'll be here next year. So I was like, okay. He named Charles Leno Jr. Okay, cool. And then he named Sam, of course, and then he named Jahan, of all people. I'm like, you're not even getting this man the ball. He's out here running wind sprints on a weekly basis and getting cardiovascular endurance, building up his cardiovascular endurance every week, playing 83 snaps and only getting 3 targets. But you're going to name Jahan as a guy that's growing? Okay, fine. I mean, I'm not at practice every day. And then he finally named Brian Robinson Jr. and he talked about how, they joke with each other. And he said he's now, Brian Robinson Jr. is now a receiver. And so, he talked about that, and I found it a little odd. Then he did his whole spiel that he likes to do where he talks about how he knows people. It's almost like EV stay chasing clout, right? Hey, name dropping, and hey, me and this guy goes way back to, he talked about Xavier Howard and where he went to high school, and he talked about Vic Fangio, and when he was in Minnesota, Fangio was in San Francisco, and this, that, and the third, and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, he did all of that with Wink Martindale and then came out and act like he had never seen a blitz before. So I'm not falling for the banana in the tailpipe again. But, he got me excited the first time he did that. The whole, I go way back with this guy, because it was week 2 against Denver and Vance Joseph. And he talked about how they were best friends and they went to, the University of Colorado together, and he knows him better than anybody else, and it looked like that was the case, right? Started out slow, but then ever since then, he's did that whole spiel about knowing the opposition's coach or players, and then we go out and get roasted and toasted. So, I'm over that. Anyway, he also talked about the process kind of staying the same. Like, nothing's really going to change on his end with some of the shuffling that's going on, because again, most of that is on the defensive side. None of that really impacts him. He's like, I'm still the offensive coordinator, I'm still the play caller, I'm still the assistant head coach. None of my titles have changed, none of my responsibilities have changed. Same. And then he went third person, and I was like, oh my God, I am done. I can't do this anymore. Same Eric Bieniemy, okay. I'm done. And so that was it for me. I had to check out after that. So I got nothing else for you, man. Let's get to let's go behind enemy lines with the Miami Dolphins. So Dolphins come in here at 8-3, one of the better teams, not just in the AFC, but in the NFL. They don't have the resume similar to Dallas. I think they're the AFC version of the Dallas Cowboys. They're high octane. They can score at moment's notice, but they haven't beaten anybody any good, right? Anytime they see a opponent with any chops, they get their doors either blown off or they just aren't good enough to get it done. Case in point, they saw the Bills earlier in the season and they got their asses waxed in Buffalo, similar to Dallas against San Francisco. Later on in the season, they played Kansas City over in Germany. They lost by a touchdown. Sound familiar? Dallas going to Philadelphia, losing by, 4, 5, whatever that score was. So, but every time they see an inferior opponent, they run the checkup, right? They run the scoreboard up. So, we'll see if that trend continues. Dallas did it to us last week. We'll see if the Dolphins can do it to us this week. They come into this game as 9.5-point favorites, do the Dolphins. And somebody asked me last night on the show, how can Washington win this game? Give me a scenario in which Washington can win. And again, it got me to thinking after the show was over, gave it a little bit more thought. And I said, in the moment when I answered the question, I'm like, you got to have the great equalizer, right? Turnovers. The Dolphins have to play down to our level, essentially. Our offense, has to come to play. They got to score, because even if the Dolphins come down to our level, they're still capable with 3 or 4 turnovers that they showed against the Giants. With 3 or 4 turnovers, they're still capable of scoring basically 30 points, even with mistakes, right? So that's not going to get it done on its own, right? Just turning the ball over. We're going to need them to play poorly. Mistakes, penalties, drop passes, etc., etc. But then I said, what else could happen? And after the great equalizer, the next biggest plain evening. The next thing that can even the playing field the most is the weather, especially when you're dealing with a team as athletically gifted as the Dolphins are. EB called them a track team, which they are, essentially a certified track team. It's going to rain on Sunday. This is going to look a lot like the Bills game from week 3, which is going to give us a chance. Because unlike the snow, the rain is a lot more troublesome. Snow, you know where you're going, easier. The rain doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's still going to be slippery, right? Snow's a little bit more easier to deal with. I've seen teams that are explosive and dynamic handle business as usual in the snow. The Patriots scored 5 touchdowns against the Tennessee Titans in 1 quarter in the snow. I've seen teams handle the snow with no problems. The rain, though, is a sumbitch. Okay? If there were any game where we needed the rain, it'd be this one. You can still get your ass beat in the rain now. Don't get it twisted. But the rain kind of evens the playing field just a smidge. Takes away that element of their speed just a bit, which gives us a fighting chance. But let's go behind enemy lines real quick and look at some of these numbers, because I've stressed this already. Part of the reason that this game is so bad for Washington on paper is because everything we do poorly, they do really well. And it's just it's a contrast in styles, and everything that we are running from at this point of the season, they're bringing to the table. So the first thing that should jump out at you for the Dolphins, if you look at their column, is scoring offense. They're scoring almost 31 points a game. They're second in the league in scoring offense, behind the Dallas Cowboys. And the Cowboys put up 45 on us last week. They're the number 1 scoring offense in football. If you look at the left column with Washington and you go all the way down to scoring defense, right here towards the middle, we're dead last, giving up 29.2 points per game. And the Dolphins are scoring just under 31. Something either has to give or it just continues to go the way that it's been going all season. So you got one of the best scoring offense. You got the worst scoring defense. You see where I'm going with this. They got the number 1 pass offense. If you go back to the Dolphins category, number 1 pass offense in football. They're averaging 285 yards per game. If you look at Washington's passing defense, right under scoring defense, you'll see that Washington is 3rd worst in the NFL at 30th, giving up 264 yards a game through the air, which means we're ripe for, and the Dolphins are poised for a monster day against a bad pass offense. They've allowed the 3rd fewest sacks this season. I told you yesterday, Tua gets the ball out of his hands lightning quick to his playmakers, which is what I thought we would be doing a little bit of, because we've got dynamic playmakers, not the kind of athletes that the Dolphins have, okay? But we got playmakers in our own right, and I thought we'd be getting the ball out of Sam's hands. We'd be running the football a little bit more and being more effective there as well. Meanwhile, you see that we're 8th in sacks. That's a very deceptive number. You take away the 9 sacks that we got from Tommy DeVito in week number 11, and clearly we are not 8th in the league in sacks. Okay, but it is what it is. But you've watched this team since the Montez Sweat and Chase Young trades. You know we can't get pressure on the quarterback unless we blitz. Okay? Someone's got to absolutely whiff. They've got to have a breakdown in protection, or we're not getting there. Rush offense. The Dolphins are 2nd in the league in rush offense, 145 yards per game. Look at our rush defense. It's not terrible, but we've been known to give up the big run, right? We've been known to give up those chunk plays. And if you get to our secondary, old Percival Butler's going to take a terrible angle and he's going to get cooked. It's happened multiple times this season. And This is the absolute worst team you could take a bad angle against because they already have angle beating speed when you take the right angle. When you take the perfect angle, they have the kind of speed that still beats that angle. So taking the wrong angle definitely is a death sentence on the back end. So if they break through that first wave and they see 35 waiting for them in the secondary, you might as well start queuing up the extra point team. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that doesn't bode well for the good guys. Then you come down all the way to the defensive side for the Dolphins. And you look at their passing defense, and you look at their scoring defense, and you look at their sacks, and look at their rush defense. And, none of these things jump out at you, and they're not, dominant in any of these categories. Maybe sacks. They're third right now with 38 sacks, and obviously we've allowed 55 sacks this season, which is second last behind the Giants this season. Everybody wants to talk about how many sacks we've given up. The Giants have given up more, but the difference is Sam Howell has taken every single one of our sacks. Their sacks are spread out amongst, 3 or 4 different quarterbacks. But that's nor here nor there. The bottom line is the Dolphins get to the quarterback and we give it up. So now they're going to be without one of their better pass rushers who just got hurt last game. And that sucks. You hate to see it. Jalen Phillips went down with a major injury, and I think he ended up tearing his ACL. He's done for the season. So that's going to hurt their pass rush. But they still got Bradley Chubb, got Christian Wilkins. They still got dogs on that side of the ball. Don't get it twisted. And, anytime we see a defensive tackle with any kind of clout, it's usually problematic for us. So Christian Wilkins could have a monster day in this game if we don't clean up some of the deficiencies we've had, particularly on the interior blocking dominant defensive tackles. Something that's interesting that struck me here is time of possession. You look at Washington, we're 9th in the league at 31 minutes and 31 and a half minutes. Meanwhile, the Dolphins are 15th at 30 minutes. They don't possess it as much because they're a quick strike offense. Meanwhile, it takes us a little bit longer to get the ball down because we don't get a lot of explosives. And, EB, one of the things he talked about is finishing drives. He said he regretted, EB talked about regretting the 4th and 1 call from, Thursday's game. He said in the moment it was the right call. No, it wasn't. In hindsight, it's easy to say, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have called that. But he doesn't regret calling that play. He regrets the lack of execution by the players. But that's the problem. He'll do it. He would do it again. He said, I would have called something else. Of course you would have. It didn't work. But that's easy to say. But you would have still called something out of the gun. You wouldn't have called something that would have given us an even better shot to work. Right? I mean, that's the stuff that I struggle with. That same Sam Howell speed option you called in the red zone, you could have called that on 4th down. That would have gave the Cowboys a different look. It would have been something different. And we haven't really shown that all season long. That's when you pull that out. But anyway, and look, we had already used it prior to that. I get it. That was a first half touchdown. But you could have done so many things off of that. Now that you had shown that, if you had a counter off of that where you made it look like speed option, Sam rolls out to his, right and then stops and a tight end on the back end of that looks like he's blocking down and then he leaks out on the backside and you have Sam stop, pivot, and turn back and throw it across the field. Like, that's the kind of shit that creative coordinators do. You build off of things that you've done earlier in the season, earlier in the game. And we just don't do that, right? Turnover differential, we're -9, they're -5. So what that says is not only do they not create a ton of turnovers, but they're also turning it over themselves. So we will have a shot if we can protect the ball and maybe force a turnover or two. Tua will throw the football to the opposition. He'll give you a shot if you can confuse him. If you give him wide open windows or you give him throws, because he's a timing and rhythm-based quarterback. He doesn't need a huge window, but he's assuming my guy's going to be here. This is where I'm putting the football. If you get into that window, he's not worried about where defenders are. I'm just going to put this ball in this window because my guy's supposed to be there. If you get into that window, that's what the Giants did. You can pick him off. Because he'll throw it blindly when he's expecting pressure. We'll see what happens. My money's on the Dolphins kicking our ass, by the way. So nothing's changed on my end. But it is going to rain. It's going to look a lot like that Bills game. That should at least give you a fighting chance. Both teams have to deal with the rain, though. And we didn't handle it very well last time I checked against Buffalo. So there's that. But in any event, that's going to do it for me. Your man, Louie T, here on Commanders Nightly News. Can't wait to read your comments in the comment section from the lead story question that I posed. Let's hope that none of these things that you guys type comes to fruition or what I said comes to fruition. Let's hope that everything that we expect to take place takes place, which is clean house, new GM, new head coach, new staff. Let's start anew, right? But we have to wait until January for any of that to take place. In the meantime, we've still actually got football games. 5 of them. And a bye week. So let's take care of those first. Anyway, I digress. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. Cowboys play the Seattle Seahawks tonight for anybody that's interested. I expect the Cowboys to destroy the Seahawks. Seahawks are wearing their dope-ass Kingdom throwbacks. Those are so crispy. Generally, you don't get that kind of dope fit on the road. That it's ballsy to go into somebody's house on a primetime television game wearing your cleanest outfit. Look, ain't nothing worse than showing up in your cleanest shit and then getting your ass whooped and getting sent home with your shit all torn up and bloodied. I hope they know what they're doing here. Anyway, we'll see. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T. Until next time, you guys, have a good one.
Here comes the diesel. Here comes the diesel. There's the snap, hand to Riggins. Good hole. He's got the first down to the 40. He's gone. The 35, the 30.